What is up, my Lorcana Goons, and welcome back to the Lorcana Goons channel. My name is Kevin, and it's that time of the format again where we can take a look at all the decks that are trending, the decks that are popular, and we can put them in a tier list to help you guys out with your future tournaments and give you guys a little bit of understanding of what's to come in the future of the Lorcana metagame. As you can see here, we have multiple tiers ranging from Goo, which is the best. This is going to be like the tier 0 section, all the way down from tier 1, 2, 3, and Buns, which are going to be decks that are borderline unplayable or decks that are going to be definitely more on the casual side. Remember guys, this is all my opinion, so not to say that you can't win with any of these decks that we're going to put in any of these tiers, but this is just from my personal experience also trying a lot of these decks. And if you like this content, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to be part of the Lorcana Goon Squad community. But let's start off with Amber Steel. Actually, as you can see here, some of these have pictures, some of them don't. So the ones that don't have pictures, we're going to base that off of the more popular version of that deck because color combination does not equal the exact deck build. There's a variety of ways you can build the color combinations, but we're going to start off with Amber Steel, traditionally the Amber Steel Whole New World deck, in which here we have an Amber Steel list by Wonderland. I found this list on his Dreamborn. It's an Amber Steel list with Whole New World, and as you can see, we have a variety of 1-drops from Robin Hood, Daisy, Cinderella, followed by our 2-cost characters of Sumi, Ursula, the Troubadour. Ursula and the Troubadour are going to help you sing songs early, which is very powerful. Really what this deck wants to do is set up a bunch of singer characters so that you can always remove cards from the opposing board, right? Because you have some of these songs that just deal infinite damage like Strength of a Raging Fire. Cinderella, Ballroom Sensation, is going to be one of the best 1-cost characters in the game because you can start singing your 3-cost songs immediately, followed by playing your 5-cost singers like Ariel. We also have the Miss Bianca over here, which you can play on turn 4 because you have several allies in this deck, right? You got the Robin Hood shift package, and Rapunzel is going to be there to make sure you can draw cards outside of using Whole New World. But the best play you can do is set up a bunch of 1-cost, 2-cost characters, sing Whole New World, and just keep doing it over and over again, right? Because of the ability to use Whole New World and to utilize one of the most polarizing cards in the game, which is singing Whole New World back to back to back, I do think this deck deserves a tier 0-1 spot. It's a very strong deck. It's always been a strong deck. The biggest issue was Ruby Sapphire was completely blowing it out of the water sometimes, but I feel like post BANLIST, you know, no Flaversham and no Fortisphere, it has a much higher chance of winning the matchups across the board, including your Ruby Sapphire matchup. So it's going to go in the tier 1 section. Next up, we have an Amber Steel aggro list. This list is traditionally referenced as the Diggy Diggy Hole deck, but it's really an Amber Steel deck with Doc in it, right? We used to see this list play Dwarves Mine and several other locations, but nowadays you're not really playing Dwarves Mine anymore. You're just playing aggressive cards. So you have a low curve starting from your Daisy Ducks. You can use Penny on turn 2 to give your Daisy Duck resist, which will let it survive longer. You got Piglets in here. You got the best 2 questers in the game like Mr. Smee, Lawrence. You're also playing 2 copies of the Shift Kita, which is very nice if you're playing an aggressive deck, right? You can play this Kita on turn 5. There's no shift targets, but still being able to play this Kita means that your opponent's characters are going to have 0 strength, which means they can't just challenge your characters. And then we even have some extra lore burst in this deck with 3 copies of Baloo, which is kind of nice. And I'm seeing 3 copies of Tiana in this list. Shout out Mayor Madness, by the way, on Twitch TV for having this deck list up on Dreamborn, because that's kind of where we're getting this. But this is an Amber Steel aggressive version of this deck. I feel like if you don't really want to use Whole New World in the Amber Steel strategy, going more of an aggressive route with your Piglets, your Lawrences, and stuff like that is going to be a little bit more of a safer bet, right? Sometimes you don't want to use Whole New World against those Ruby decks, because oftentimes you don't want to use it to give them more Be Prepared, more big Sisus in their hand. I also really like this Rapunzel's Tower. Very nice location here. Does not give you any lore, but if you have characters here, it bumps up their willpower by 3, which is pretty powerful because that makes your Rapunzel a little bit more interesting to utilize in combination with some of the other cards you have. But where should we put the Amber Steel aggro deck in this tier list? I think it also goes in tier 1. Not to say these decks aren't the best decks. I just feel like there are some decks in these lists that are a little bit better than Amber Steel as a color combination right now. Still very strong. Still a very strong way to play this strategy, though. So it is going to be in the tier 1 section. It does have an issue, though, dealing with opposing crabs, foxes, and big Sisus. So that can be one of the biggest drawbacks, I think, when playing Amber Steel as a color combination right now. This is a really cool Amber Steel location deck that I found by Earlmeister. I've been seeing him post about his list as well. I know you be streaming on the Earlmeister, so shout out you. This deck is very powerful. This is a location-based Amber Steel deck, and you can use location strategies in other combinations outside of Amber Steel, but realistically, I do think this is one of the better ways to use it. You really want to take advantage of this John Silver here, the Greedy Treasure Seeker. He's a 3-cost character with 3/3 willpower and strength that says if you have any locations on board, you gain +1 lore and +1 resist for each one you have, which is pretty powerful when you're playing very low-cost locations like Neverland, the Bayou, the Underworld, Nottingham. A lot of these locations have very big willpower, and just like the other decks, you're able to control the board with cards like Calhoun, Smee, to make sure you have good trades. Even Captain Hook. Captain Hook is very powerful right now. You can contest a lot of the 3 willpower characters. Sometimes I have seen people play Fire the Cannons in this deck as well, because it's more of an aggressive style deck, you know, or maybe you want to also add some songs and play Cinderella Ballroom Sensation with the Storm Rage on, because that's a very strong combo nevertheless in the beginning, right? I also like the John Silver, the Fry Cook over here, the Ship Cook, I believe is what he's called, because he's going to have an ability that stops your opponent from challenging your characters, which can be very nice in a location style deck, because most of these locations, if not all of them, are going to give you passive lore every turn. So stopping your opponent from challenging them is pretty important. I do think this deck is really good. I wouldn't put it in tier 1 though, unfortunately, or at least location strategies, I would not put them in tier 1, mainly because there's a lot of rush characters going around lately. We've been seeing the rise of Peter Pan Shadow in a lot of these purple decks, and Peter Pan Shadow will give rush to all your evasive characters, including Maui Shark, Iago, Pegasus, you know, and in general, there's just big rush characters floating around in the metagame with foxes, big Mauis, etc. So because of that, I can't necessarily put it in tier 1. It's gonna have to go in tier 2, but I do think that it's a very strong aggro strategy, right? So if you're playing against a lot of control matchups in your local meta, I think this is a decent way to combat that. Next up, let's talk about Mufasa decks, because we have a top 8 deck list here from AZ Aquaman. You're getting a top 8 in a tournament with a set 7 Mufasa list, which is a pretty cool strategy that has, you know, been happening since Mufasa came out in Rise of the Floodborn. You can use Mufasa in decks that play mostly characters, so that when Mufasa gets banished, you look at the top card of your deck and bam, you play a character for free. Most of the time, you're going to hit a character with this, especially when you're playing a list like this that's only playing 7 non-characters total. There's a variety of ways to play a Mufasa deck. You can play it with Amber Steel, you can play with Amber Sapphire, maybe Amber Ruby as well. That might be something you're into. But yeah, Amber Steel Mufasa, I think, is one of my favorite ways to play this deck right now. So huge shout out to AZ Aquaman for getting top 8 at his tournament. As you can see here, we have a lot of the aggressive characters that can quest for 2, like Smee, Lawrence, Rapunzel even, to make sure we're drawing some cards. And he's playing 3 copies of Doc. This is the Amber style Doc where he quests for 2, and when you quest, you pay 1 less for the next character you play, which means that on turn 3 you play Doc, on turn 4 you quest with Doc, and now your Mufasa, your Bagheera, and your Beast Tragic Hero only cost 4 ink, which is really powerful. I like that he's playing Bagheera in this deck. I think this is a very good card to play in a Mufasa style deck, especially Amber Steel Mufasa, right? Bagheera is a 5-cost character with Bodyguard that can quest for 2 every turn, and during your opponent's turn, if he's banished in a challenge, actually just banished in general, you'll deal 2 damage to every opposing character, which is very nice. Oftentimes people just say, well, then they just won't challenge the Bagheera, but if you have all these power questers like Piglet, Lilo, Daisy, you're gonna have to get rid of the Bagheera one way or another. And if you have a Maui Shark that challenges into the Bagheera, it's gonna take 4 damage from the initial challenge and then 2 extra damage, which means it'll eliminate most characters with around 6 willpower or less. The ones that challenged it, right? And if they have floating characters, they're gonna take 2 damage as well. And we also got 3 copies of Tinkerbell Giant Fairy as an extra powerhouse, right? Sometimes you just gotta be able to deal burst damage across the board, which is kind of nice. But I do like this deck. I also like the addition of Helga Sinclair in here. It's a 2-cost character, 0/4, that gains evasive on your turn and has challenger +3. This means that if your opponent has Diablos on board, you can challenge them pretty easily, even banish them if they're on the cove. AZ Aquaman, I want to congratulate you for getting a top 8 with Mufasa. Mufasa is a very strong strategy. I think it's an underrated strategy. I want to put it between tier 1 or tier 2. It's going to be a tier 2 deck, not because of its power level, but also because of how likely you are to see it in a tournament. I don't think you're very likely to run into a Mufasa strategy in a tournament, so because of that, I cannot put it necessarily in tier 1. Remember, tiers also mean the expectation that you will see in a tournament landscape, right? So I don't think a lot of people are going to be playing this type of strategy, but I definitely think you can win tournaments with this strategy. We've seen Amber Amethyst Mufasa take first place at a DLC before, right? So I really just think it has to do with how you're cooking the deck, and depending on what strategy you're going for, if you're going to use a red yellow Mufasa or an Amber Steel Mufasa deck, right? I do think that it's going to be powerful nonetheless. And since we're on the topic of like Mufasa decks, most Mufasa decks are traditionally a red yellow. I did cook up a red yellow song deck that's not Mufasa, so we can put it in this tier list too, right? So here's my rendition of Red Yellow Non-Mufasa for this deck. I've been playing it on Lorcanito also on the online on ladder, and I've been doing pretty good. I'm gonna have like a 4-0 record in matches against some steel decks, right? But I have been also losing to the big name like red, blue, green, purple tier big tier decks, right? So as you can see here, the main strategy here is to be able to play your 2-cost characters with 4 willpower on turn 2, so that you have good Rapunzel targets. You can use Teeth and Ambitions to hit your Queen of Hearts, your Vanessa, right? And then later on heal them with Rapunzel. We also have Vanessa to sing cards like Be King Undisputed a little bit earlier, which is kind of nice. We have the Queen of Hearts sensing weaknesses in this deck, so we can draw some extra cards, because it does feel like this deck lacks draw power. Our real only draw engine is going to be Rapunzel right here, which Rapunzel is the best Amber card to use for draw power. But I've been using Hades in this deck to grab back Rapunzel, so that we don't run out of draw power when we need it. You know what I mean? Hades is also very good to grab back your Sisus, your Medusas, even your Maui Half Sharks after they've already been limited from the board once. It does feel like Maui Half Shark does carry this deck sometimes, so when you don't have Maui Half Shark, it doesn't slow the game down enough for you. But when you do pull off a Maui Half Shark, you're able to control the game for a cool minute and then just start singing cards like Pirates Live, Be King Undisputed, even use Be Prepared to gain that extra lure when you need it. It's a really fun deck. I've enjoyed myself playing it, but it is not it is not tier 1. It's not even tier 2 in my opinion. I do find myself struggling to win a lot of the matches when I am playing this deck. So unfortunately, the red yellow song deck that I made is going to have to be in the tier 3 section. It's not buns though. I would straight up take it to a local tournament and a local league night and see if I can win it. You know what I mean? So I think I could probably go 4-0 in a small locals with this deck, right? But it's not going to be anywhere as good as the Mufasa or the Amber Steel decks we've been looking at so far. All right, next up we have Green Blue Cow. So this is a Baja Blast Sapphire Emerald deck that I've been working on. There's a lot of Sapphire Emerald lists on Dreamborn or on Ink decks that you can probably find. Personally, I don't really see many of them topping tournaments, so I just ended up making one myself. And I've been playing this online too, and I think it's a decent deck. I've been trying to utilize the combination of Fishbone Quill with Clarabelle to make sure we can always draw cards. I think Diablo is very good, especially if you put him in the Cove. My favorite part about this deck is you can use Sapphire Coil, ink some extra cards, and now your opponent's characters are in range for cards like Under the Sea. I also really like the Shift Basil in combination with cards like Clarabelle. This deck could use also one Bend to My Will, maybe, depending on how you're playing it. But what ends up happening oftentimes when you play Clarabelle, your opponent will start inking their hand size away or lowering their hand size little by little to make sure you don't generate more value off the Clarabelle, and that's when you hit them with the Basil. That's when you hit them with the Bend to My Will to discard the rest of their cards in hand. So it's a pretty cool deck. I love ramping into the cow. I also think maybe you can add more combinations of Baymax right here, so you can shift your T-Pos early or shift onto your one-drop Diablos, because being able to play this Baymax on turn 3 and then seeing how far we go is very strong. I already know that list isn't everyone's cup of tea. I usually do see people play the green-blue strategy with cards like Muses. They use a lot of songs so they can bounce stuff back. I think that's still a decent strategy too. I've just never tried it, so I don't want to provide a deck list because I don't want to talk about something I don't know. But all in all, I don't necessarily think that green-blue is going to be one of the top tier decks. You know, I'm gonna have to put this deck, this color combination, in tier 3 still. It's still decent. You know, another deck I would also love to take to a local tournament, but taking that deck, I'm not gonna expect to have an easy time. You know, it is going to feel like an uphill battle sometimes using this type of strategy. Let's talk about Blue Steel post Hiram ban list, because we have a Blue Steel list here by Create, aka Riplung. Shout out you, he's been on the channel before. I trust him with a Blue Steel list just as much as I trust a lot of other Blue Steel players, so I kind of wanted to see what he came up with, and I think this is probably the way you're going to go about seeing Sapphire Steel in the metagame. We have a whole new world situation going on where you can use Fishbone Quill again, dump your hand, sing Whole New World, and just get tons of value that way. But there's no Tamatoas in this deck. I'm a little surprised to see that. It seems a little bit more like you're generating some tempo value with your Beast Tragic Heroes, your Robin Hoods, Tinkerbells, and big Simbas over here. There's a lot of Diablos running around in this current meta. The same thing goes for some of the Maui Half Sharks, and the Ruby Amethyst decks are playing Maui Half Shark 2 now. So You're going to want to use cards like Zoo, Strength of a Raging Fire to make sure you can control the board. But without the consistency of cards like Bell Apprentice Inventor and the Fortisphere in the deck, it does feel like a different version of Sapphire Steel. As you can see, we are not seeing any Popsicles in this deck list alongside no Tamatoas and stuff like that. So you can't really develop the same strategy you had before where you had a bunch of items and you play Lucky Dime and you just gain a bunch of lore, right? Now you're going for more of a tempo control style strategy is what it's looking like here. Our only ramp cards are going to be Fishbone Quill and Sail the Azurite Sea. So you're going to want to definitely see one of those in your opening hand when playing a deck like this. And because of the ban list hit without any Flavershams in this deck, I do think it lands in the tier 2 section. It's still good. I like the strategy behind it, but you're just lacking some type of like extra consistent draw power. You know, you're forced to play cards like Beast Tragic Hero, which are definitely good, but they're not going to be the same as playing something like Flaversham, because realistically you're going to have to use Whole New World eventually with this deck. And sometimes, like I said with the other decks, you don't want to use Whole New World against some of the Ruby decks. Next up, we have the Sapphire Steel Kiwi deck, which is more of an aggressive style of Sapphire Steel. Here we have the Nobel Peace Prize, get it, Nobel, by Harlan Sweet. Shout out Harlan, he has a YouTube channel as well. He's one of the creators of this aggro Sapphire Steel strategy that we've been seeing a lot in the last couple months of the meta. This deck is very different than your traditional Whole New World style deck because you don't even play any ramp cards in this deck. You don't not ramp with this Sapphire strategy. Really what you're trying to do is just take control of the early game with your Smees and Calhouns. And if you're going first, you just want to quest out with those guys, right? You can go turn 1 Robin Hood, turn 2 Smee, turn 3 Shift Robin, and you can start singing songs like Strength of a Raging Fire to keep control of the board. The following turns can be pretty crucial because on turns 4 through 5, you can curve into a Pluto Guard Dog, which I think is a very strong card in this meta, especially with the amount of Maui Half Sharks that are running around. And then turn 5, you can play something like Cogsworth, give everything resist so that when they're questing, they're more likely to survive. You can play Baymax, which will heal some of your characters like Sami, and it'll gain you some more lore. I didn't even know Baymax triggers on play and when you quest, so sometimes that just keeps your Samis alive forever. You also got Gantu on turn 5, or the Robin Hood Champion of Sherwood on turn 5 right there to make sure you can still get some extra draw power in this deck, because realistically, the only way you draw cards in this deck is going to be off of Dock and off of when your Robin Hood Champion of Sherwood gets banished. There's even 2 Babooms in here to deal with those pesky Diablos, and we also got Migdug Manor here. I do think Migdug Manor is very good against Emerald decks because the 9 willpower is pretty hefty, you know? So I think the deck's really good. I don't think there's a lot of representation for this deck anymore in Sapphire Steel, but I think aggro decks right now do very well against some of the more control-based strategies that we're starting to see with Ruby Amethyst and Ruby Sapphire, pivoting to playing cards like Maui Half Shark. I feel like some of these decks are a little bit faster in the early game than some of the Ruby decks that are very popular right now. So I'm going to go ahead and put it in tier 1. I think this is a little bit better than the traditional Sapphire Steel Whole New World deck that you might see running around. So personally, I think you're more likely to see the Kiwi aggro Sapphire Steel deck in your local meta as opposed to any other type of Sapphire Steel deck, as opposed to some of these other strategies that we see, right? I know there's also a dedicated community based for this type of deck, so a lot of people still play this. So I do think you should expect it, know the ins and outs of it, etc. Next up, we have a Blurple deck by Bobapede, and I am thinking that Blurple is getting way better in this new post-ban list meta, to be honest. This deck is pretty cool. The ability to ramp into your Genies, your Elsas, your Bell Accomplished Mystics is actually really powerful. And my favorite part about this deck is that you could still play your Bell Apprentice Inventor and play Popsicle in this deck, because Bell is a shift target for your Amethyst Bell, right? So this might be one of the few decks that you could actually play the Bell Apprentice Inventor in, and you can use that Bell to start singing songs like Friends on the Other Side. Maybe you even want to play something like One Jump Ahead so you can sing that early too. But either way, you have the ability to play a turn 3 character on turn 1, which is pretty good for a Blurple deck, right? That used to have trouble controlling some of the early game. Now you can really take control of the early game, contest those Smees, those Calhouns with your 3-cost Bell on turn 1, and you play a lot of evasive characters. So Diablo isn't something you got to worry about here. You have Genies, you have Elsa the Fit Spirit, you also have Cusco for some location removal, you got Hades for this character removal in the future. My favorite part too is that this deck can play Tamatoa Happy as a clan as an extra draw engine almost. You know, you play popsicles, you pop them with Bell, or maybe you just pop them to heal your characters, and then you ramp into this Tamatoa Happy as a clam, and you don't even have to play items for free. Realistically, you're just grabbing more popsicles from the discard back, and you're doing what Amethyst loves to do the most. You're just drawing free cards. I also really like Finders Keepers in this deck. It feels so disrespectful to be able to ramp into a card that just says draw 3 cards, so you're going to be at like 5, 6, 7 ink, and your opponent's barely going to be at 4, and your hand size is going to be huge, right? But yeah, this deck is really strong. I do think we're in a Crab Fox kind of meta as well. I think Crab is such a good card right now, so being able to have a deck that can not only like ramp faster than the other purple decks, but also be able to play something like 4 copies of Crab, Genie, Scrooge McDuck, some power cards, I think is really powerful. So I think it's kind of a sleeper deck personally. I'm gonna have to put this in tier 1. Like I know people might think I'm crazy for that one, but I think it's up there. I do think that it has a very strong strategy, especially being able to deal with the red blue Sapphire decks that are really popular right now. You, like I said, you have a lot of evasive characters, a lot of characters that can float around through Be Prepared's, big Sisus. You know, you can shove in rabbits, you can shove in Cusco's, Diablo, so that if you do deal with board wipe decks, you just keep drawing cards anyway. But yeah, very good deck. Don't sleep on blue, purple, blurple, as they say. And shout out Boba Pete for posting that list on Dreamborn. All right, here we have a green steel deck list by Dale Bolito. It's an updated discard toolbox deck that he's posted on Dreamborn. I think green steel is definitely a good deck. It's one of the few decks that can play Diablo consistently. You have so many actions to be able to play your Diablo on turn 1, move it to the Cove on turn 1 too, so he has 3 willpower, which is really annoying to deal with. You also have the ability to discard cards from the opponent's hand with Sudden Chill, Ursula. We also have Lucifer in here, which can discard up to 2 cards. The discard strategy is kind of polarizing, and as we've seen, it doesn't necessarily mean it's the best deck all of a sudden of the format, but still very powerful nonetheless. My issue is that I think Prince John is overpowered, right? On turn 3, you can set up situations where your opponent has to brawl between Ursula and Diablo. Then on turn 4, you play Prince John, you sing twice with Ursula, you discard 2 cards from your opponent's hand with Sudden Chill, and then you're just drawing 2 cards. You got Hypnotize in here to follow up with that. I'm Still Here is another song you can use with Ursula alongside Storm Rage on, Strength of a Raging Fire. And we don't talk about Bruno, which can be sung with all of our 5-cost characters, Cricky, Lucifer, Beast, and the Space Pirate, which is a new card from the Arcasia's Island set, which will stop your opponent from singing songs and give your pirates resist. This is a very good deck. This is a very, very good deck, and I do think Pluto Guard Dog deserves to be in this deck as well. I really want to point that out. Like I've been saying, we're in a Maui Shark format, and this Pluto Guard Dog hits the board with 5 strength and 5 willpower. You know, granted, if you deal any damage to him, he goes back down to a 1 strength character, but, you know, there's not a lot of just random ping damage in the game. There's not a lot of ways to just do like Fire the Cannons type damage, especially if you're playing a Maui Shark deck, right? I think the only card you might be using is like Teeth and Ambitions or something, and you know, if you don't have that in your deck, you're probably trading a whole Maui into this Pluto. So because green steel plays 2 of the best cards in all of Lorcana right now, those being Prince John and Diablo, I gotta put it in the goo section. We have our first goo deck right here, tier 0 in my opinion, like one of the best decks of the format. Definitely polarizing, honestly. Sometimes when you play against this deck, it feels like you cannot do anything if you don't draw your Diablo out, and then when they set up their Prince Johns, oh my goodness, you can't even touch that guy. He just has wards, so you have to have something like Big Sisu, Be Prepared, grab your swords to deal with the Prince John. Maybe Be King Undisputed is another option, but man, the combination of those 2 cards and the Ursula to sing actions twice, it just feels like too much sometimes. So I do gotta put green steel in the goo tier 0 section. Here we have an Emerald Amethyst discard deck. Speaking of discard strategies, there's more ways to do the discard, to utilize a discard strategy outside of just playing Emerald Steel. You can play Emerald Amethyst, which this deck has been popping off since before the ban list as well. It was already doing pretty well even before Hiram banned. So now that Flaversham's banned, where do you think it lands in the tier list, huh? Where can you guess? Before we pick and decide where we're going to put it on the tier list, I do want to cover the fact that this deck plays 4 different Diablos. You have Diablo Obedient Raven, Maleficent Spy. You also have the 2-cost Raven alongside Devoted Herald. So you have tons of Diablo shift targets that you can utilize in this deck, which is really cool. It makes your Diablo turn 1 play very consistent, and you only play 2 Hidden Cove, but still the Mulligan in Lorcana is very good, so you have a really high chance of going Diablo shift, move him into the Cove, and now he's going to survive a lot of the challenges or actions that would normally take him out. Shout out Poison is, by the way, for this deck list, you know. And since you have a lot of evasive characters, you're going to be able to quest a lot without getting challenged. So, you know, you can take advantage of the fact that your Genie quest for 2, your Elsa quest for 1, you know, and you even have Cricky in this deck, which quests for 3. This deck plays both Crab, Fox, and Diablo, and Prince John. So, you know what? I gotta put it in the tier 0 section as well. And goo, I think this deck is very good. I definitely think that this deck is very powerful. As you can see, we're seeing a trend here. 2 Emerald decks in the top section of this tier list. I think Emerald has positioned itself, at least the Emerald discard strategy has positioned itself to be, you know, up there with some of the best decks of Lorcana right now. And I know a lot of people would agree because people have been asking for Diablo to get banned for such a long time. Personally, there's tons of outs to Diablo, so I don't think it needs a ban hammer, but that Prince John, man, oof, that Prince John just stays on the board all day. Next up, we have Amethyst Steel. We have 2 Amethyst Steel lists. They're kind of similar, so I mean, bear with me here, but I do think that they're a little bit different in their own way. We have an Amethyst Steel, somewhat of a mid-range style now that's been becoming very popular post Flaversham ban. As you can see here, it's a traditional purple steel strategy where you're starting off with your many 1-cost characters on turn 1. Maybe you're even playing 2 1-cost characters on turn 2. This helps a lot against opposing steel matchups, by the way. Instead of playing a turn 2 Calhoun, you can play like Broom turn 1, Diablo Chernobog turn 2, so that on turn 3, you can almost guarantee yourself a target for Fox or Crab, which is really important when you're going on the draw as opposed to on the play. I do think on the play, you probably want to set up a Calhoun or a Smee on turn 2. Turn 3 is very nice too for you because you can go Giant Cobra or Peter Pan, the Shadow Finder over here, which will give your evasive characters rush. That means your Iago on turn 4 will have rush, or maybe something like your Genie. But this deck is very good at gaining passive lore from turns 1 through 4, and then turns 5 and on, you can start playing some bigger hitters like the Elsa Spirit. You can also start playing Merlin Goats and start bouncing them back to gain even more lore. We do have Strength of a Raging Fire as our only removal. I do think that Along Came Zeus does deserve to be in this deck, though, because of the amount of Maui Half Sharks that are going to start running around, right? But we have ways to combat the actions. If they play Maui Half Sharks with 4 copies of Pete, you can always bounce Pete back with the Fox and play it again, which is really cool. You can also bounce back your Doc with Fox and play it again, which is very nice, because you do have a small draw engine in here. It's really just consisting of Genie and Doc. We don't have any friends on the other side or anything like that. So sometimes you want to be able to use Doc over and over again to just keep drawing 2 cards. Library is also somewhat of a draw engine. Library is a very good card because you can move your characters into the library, and if they're setting up for a Be Prepared or a big Sisu line, then you're going to draw cards regardless, which is really nice. Probably one of the best plays, though, is to move your Broom or your Chernobog into the library and trigger their abilities, because they trigger when they're banished, so it'll also trigger the library for you to draw extra cards, which is always really nice. So purple steel mid-range is, I guess, what I'm gonna call it, because we are playing some like 5-cost characters and higher and whatnot. This deck is definitely in tier 1. I do think that this deck has the ability to evolve to something a little bit more scary as well. You know what I mean? The last format, we saw Zach Bivens reach the top cut of Nationals playing purple steel with Lauren, Strength of a Raging Fire, stuff like that too. And I've been seeing a lot of big players pivot to playing purple steel as a more mid-range style. My issue, though, is that it does have a tough time, in my opinion, consistently dealing with some huge shark threats. But you know what? Maybe I'm wrong, because I have been seeing some of the top-notch players like Kendall Burdett doing really well with this strategy. So I'm going to go ahead and put it in the goo section. I'll put it up there with the best decks. Let me know what you think about Purple Steel in the meta overall, though. I get the feeling that it's going to be able to do a lot more than what we're thinking of. But I did make a more Purple Steel aggro version, which I am a little bit more partial to, because some of the Sapphire decks scare me, right? And some of the Amethyst Ruby decks scare me too. So this deck plays a little bit more lore questers like the Maleficent Biding Her Time. We have Fire the Cannons as well to deal with Diablos early on. There's 2 Elsa Fit Spirit in here, but you could probably just take those out. Definitely want to play Zeus in this deck, though. I think Zeus is really important for the current meta. And we even have extra ways to burst lore with 4 copies of White Flower as well. It's a very similar strategy, a very similar deck, but really the biggest difference is trying to fit in cards like Fire the Cannons, Maleficent Biding Her Time, so you can really take control of that early game as fast as possible. So this one does feel a little bit more cheesy, you know, so this one I am going to put in tier 1. I think it's still tier 1, but this version of Purple Steel does not deserve to be up there with the best decks. It is very fragile. There are some times where you just can't stop the opposing tramp, for example, to give their characters a bunch of strength, and then all of a sudden your characters are getting banished really easily through crabs and foxes and stuff like that. So I do think it can be a little fragile going against the other decks. And if you're playing against Ruby Sapphire, if they stabilize against you, ooh, it's kind of over. And especially nowadays that people are playing like 4 copies of Pirate's Life in a lot of their Ruby decks, it does make it a little bit harder to close the game out with some of these Amethyst Steel strategies. And speaking of Ruby Sapphire strategies, we have a Ruby Sapphire item deck to go over. Check this out. This is Ruby Sapphire with no Flaversham. We're taking advantage of Maurice's Workshop to be able to use that as a draw engine, and several items in this deck ranging from Vitalisphere, Popsicle, Sapphire Coil, Great Stone Dragon, and Lucky Dime. I think Maui Half Shark is such a good card, and being able to ramp into Maui Half Shark is probably one of the best things you can do to slow the game down. No Flaversham means that you can have a tough time keeping a hand size full, but that's why we're using cards like Maurice's Workshop and all these items to make sure we can consistently draw cards. I also like Scrooge, McDuck, and Prince John, the 4-cost characters in this deck. I've seen some people toy around with the Queen Diviner, which is also an option, but personally, I like these cards a little bit more. Scrooge is going to let you look for an item on the top 4 cards of your deck, which is really nice because we play a decent amount of items in this list. You could even play more items like Gold Coin or the Ruby Potion, stuff like that, right? I also like Prince John in this deck. Prince John is a 4-cost character, 3 strength, 4 willpower that says exert. Play an item for free from your discard or hand that costs 5 or less, which is pretty cool because you can keep playing your Popsicles over and over again. Let's say you don't have Tamatoa Happy as a clam just yet. You can still grab your Popsicles from the discard pile with this Prince John. And I think since we need more 4-cost characters to fill in that Flaversham slot, we're playing 4 copies of Grandma Tala. Yeah, Ruby Sapphire items is a pretty good deck. We did see this deck take first place at a DLC like back in the day, you know, with the Queen Diviner and whatnot. And I think one of the best things you can do with this deck is set up a bunch of items and then just you win with Lucky Dime. You know what I mean? There's even merits of playing 2 Lucky Dime in this style of deck because you are still playing Tamatoa So Shiny, which is very powerful. And I've seen a lot of people see success with this blue-red item deck, especially against some of the newer Ruby Amethyst or Green Steel strategies, right? I'm gonna have to put this in tier 1 though. I do feel like focusing on an item strategy is a little bit slow compared to some of the other strategies we have in Lorcana right now, and a little bit inconsistent. You know, heavily relying on a card like Workshop does kind of set you back a couple turns because you have to waste 3 ink to play it initially, and every time you play an item to draw a card, you're spending 1 more ink. And oftentimes it feels like you're playing against old Ruby Sapphire where they're just trying to set up a Lucky Dime combo against you, which can take a little bit too long sometimes. But next up, we have a version of Ruby Sapphire that I think is just a little bit better, a little bit more consistent. This is the DKP first place list post ban list that's playing All Is Found at 3 copies. This card's very good. If you're worried about the discard meta taking over, then you can use cards like All Is Found to grab cards from your discard pile and put them into your inkwell. This means that on turn 5, you can play it, and then next turn you're going to have up to 8 ink to use, which is actually just really insane because you're setting up yourself for a Sisu empowered sibling without having to shift, you know, and against some of these Emerald / Amethyst decks, that's all you need, just 1 Sisu to go off. And just like DKP's other decks, we're playing 4 Maui Shark, 4 Pirate's Life, 4 McDuck Manor, which is a great way for you to gain lore and a great way to steal lore from the opponent. So a lot of these aggro decks do suffer from the 4 copies of Pirate's Life. I think Pirate's Life is such a good card right now, especially if you're playing Maui Half Shark. I think you need to be playing 4 copies of Pirate's Life. There's a lot of aggro decks that we've been putting in the tier 1 section, and I think the reason they're not in tier 0 is because they lose out to the amount of times this deck can not only play Pirate's Life from drawing it or searching it off of stuff like Visions, How Far Will Go, but grabbing a Pirate's Life back from the discard pile with Maui Shark is just unfair. The moment that card hits the discard pile, you know that you can start grabbing it back with Maui Half Shark. I know DKP posted an updated list today where he took out the Super Goof and added a 3rd copy of Tamatoa Happy as a Clam. That just tells me that Happy as a Clam is still a very powerful card in the metagame, and like I've been saying, being able to just grab 1 or 2 Popsicles from your discard pile consistently is borderline unfair. That's a +2 every single time you play this Tamatoa. He's not even playing Sapphire Coil. People were worried about Sapphire Coil being such a problematic card. There's not even a Sapphire Coil in this deck. You're really just relying on cards like Be Prepared and Sisu Empowered Sibling to use as your board wipes and your removal. There's no brawls either. either in this deck. This deck is a strategy-based deck, and from his words himself, you have to be patient when knowing how to use this deck, but the results speak for themselves. The results speak for themselves. This is a tier 0.5, however you want. The goo. It's in the goo section. It's one of the best decks. It's up there with the best decks in Lorcana, but as you can see, there's a lot of good decks you can play right now in the metagame. Next up, we have a green-red deck by Beta Candio, who is working for Team Lorcana now. I mean, he's over here posting text on Dreamborn, so I had to give this one a shout out. This deck looks really interesting. Calls it Hood Spells, which is going to utilize Robin Hood, the sharpshooter's ability to play cards from your discard pile for free whenever he quests. You also have evasive threats in here like the Diablo, everybody's favorite. You got Diablo in this deck, the ability to shift Diablo on turn 1. No hidden Cove, which is really interesting. I think Cove is just that good to be playing with Diablo, but in combination with that, you're playing Prince John, you're playing cards to discard from the opponent's hand like Hypnotize, Sudden Chill, Bruno, and all these cards can be played for free if you hit them off of the Robin Hood Sharpshooter, which is really interesting. I haven't tried this deck out myself. I'm a little afraid to try it out because I feel like I might not be good with it, but because I haven't seen anybody really use it lately and I haven't seen any representation, I'm going to have to put it in the tier 3 section. I do not expect to see a green-yellow Christmas at my local league. Not to say it's a bad deck, you know, I definitely got to try it out myself. The strategy there, it just feels a little bit lackluster. I do think there needs to be a little bit more of a consistent draw engine for this color combination, because right now you'd be heavily relying on Prince John or Diablo sticking to the board, and like we've been saying, there's a lot of outs to Diablo nowadays. You have Genie, Elsa's, you can play the Ruby Pegasus, you have Brawl, stuff like that, and that deck was not playing any hidden code. For the most part, the Diablo's pretty fragile, and that Diablo has a target on its back because most people will know that's really your only draw engine in this color combo. Here's an interesting list. I had to make myself smaller on the screen right here just so I can show every card. This is Ruby Amethyst Toolbox. This is like more of a traditional Ruby Amethyst style. It's a little bit everywhere right here, right? But I do think this is a representation of what Ruby Amethyst kind of used to be in the previous formats, as opposed to some of the shark builds that we've been seeing running around lately. This is by Ed Chu, who is our national champion for Lorcana, so I definitely want to put some respect on this deck list and his name. You could probably take out a lot of these cards and just play 4 ofs of like Snake or even Pegasus, stuff like that, but all in all, it's more of a Ruby Amethyst bounce deck, right? So Ruby Amethyst bounce, we know what this does. Turn 1, you want to play Broom Chernabog. Turn 2, maybe you play Flynn Rider or Pegasus to contest an opposing Diablo. There's also the ability for you to play Queen of Hearts, the new Ruby card that has 4 willpower, 1 strength, right? You can follow that up with Crabs or Sisus as a strong turn 3 curve, and then you can play Genies or Rabbits or even a Goat on turn 4. This deck has a little bit of everything. You don't have to play the toolbox version, but in general, I feel like Ruby Amethyst is really good. I kind of pivoting towards an anti-meta strategy where if you know what the meta is looking like, you can start playing cards like Lady Tremaine, Medusa very comfortably. You could even play cards like Dragonfire to make sure you have outs to Maui Half Shark. Personally, I love locations in this deck. I think Castle and Library are very strong because you can set those up be prepared. So if you have a location on board and you be prepared on the board, you're going to just clear every character and your opponent's going to have to figure out how to deal with the locations that are still lingering there, which is really important. So for the sake of the argument, let's just call this Ruby Amethyst bounce, right? And let's see where we would put that in the tier list. I think this color combination is still tier 1, you know, and alongside like the way you build it, maybe not the toolbox version personally, but so I'll put this in tier 1 actually instead of tier 0. So like I do think though that the strategy of Ruby Amethyst is always going to be up there with some of the best decks. You know, I will put it in the best deck section. Like I said, maybe not that toolbox list exactly, but the idea that you can get that list and bump some of the numbers up to 4, put them, let's take out some of the other cards, and you have a strong Ruby Amethyst deck list that you know is going to go well into the future meta, I think is very reliable. Next up, we have the red purple shark, the Maui shark Ruby Amethyst deck that I was talking about. This is just an example of the list. I know there was some success at the recent tournaments this past weekend that were playing no Pegasus, no Medusa, Flora, the Peter Pan Shadow, stuff like that. But really, I think the core of the deck is the ability to use shark and your evasive characters, because Peter Pan Shadow will give your evasive characters rush. Shark with Pirate's Life is just so good. You even have cards like Iago, which is a big evasive character. He's a 4/6 body. He has Vanish, but there's not a lot of stuff to trigger the Vanish ability nowadays in the meta, especially with less Sapphire Steel in the meta. It feels really just like Amethyst Steel and Emerald Steel are the big steel decks you might see. Nevertheless, being able to give a 4/6 body rush on curve is pretty good. So if you're playing against this deck and you see a Peter Pan Shadow, make sure to play around the future evasive characters that come down after that. They're able to draw a bunch of cards with feels like, while constantly removing threats from your side of the board with Brawl, Be Prepared, Big Sisu, etc. In fact, it might be even a little bit better than your traditional Ruby Amethyst bounce, with snakes, goats, and foxes. I think the red-purple shark deck is where the deck is headed, and I gotta put it in the goo section up here with the rest of the best decks up here. I am a little biased. I am a Ruby Amethyst enjoyer myself. I really love playing red-purple, and I think the addition of Maui Shark in that deck is what's gonna take it over the top to put it as one of the best decks of the format. And normally you used to have like a really tough time against green steel discard, but with the addition of Genie, Elsa in the meta, even that 2-drop Pegasus, I feel like you have plenty of Diablo outs. Really the hardest matchup is red-blue for this deck, you know what I mean? Because when they have a Maui Shark, you need to solve it with your own cards, and you don't have a lot of removal for their Maui Shark, so I recommend maybe trying cards like Dragonfire, Be King Undisputed, Lady Tremaine, stuff like that. But yeah, red-purple best deck. Next up we have Ruby Steel. Now Ruby Steel got its own dual ink color with the new Mushu card. This is, in my opinion, trying to build around the Mushu card itself with this deck. We have multiple ways to engage with our opponent's characters through challenging, even with some rush characters like Goofy, Super Goof, Maui, Hero to All. We're playing the Maui Sharks, but I'm also playing 2 copies of Break Free, which is a way to give your Maui Shark rush. I've seen Liz play Whole New World. Personally, I don't like Whole New World in this deck, so I think a dock package is more than fine, but either way, you're kind of doing the same thing. You want to start the early game off by controlling it with Captain Hook, Smee, Calhoun. You have Sisu shift lines, so you can go into alongside cards like Moana, which is an evasive to help you clear opposing Diablos. Some extra removal in this deck as well with the Long Came Zeus, Strength Ever Raging Fire, and One Last Hope, which will let you give a hero character the ability to challenge readied characters and give it resist +2. And if you didn't know, Maui Shark is a hero, so you can use Maui Shark to challenge readied characters with this deck. You can also use Fan the Flames, which is a really cool combo because you'll be able to ready your Maui Shark again after you challenged, grab back the same Fan the Flames, and just keep looping that cycle over and over again until you clear every character from the opponent's side of the board. But for sure, the biggest thing this deck lacks is going to be draw power, and I think because of the lack of consistent draw power anyways, so because of the lack of draw power, I don't think it goes in the goo section. I don't think it goes in tier 1. It's going to have to be more of a tier 2 deck for me. I think you can win with this deck. There's definitely ways to develop your strategy to find success with this deck, but personally, it's not the scariest matchup in my opinion. I think if I sit down and I see a red steel across from me, I'm going to feel a little bit more confident if I'm playing one of these top tier decks up here. Next up, we have Amber, Sapphire, Yellow, Blue. This is a really cool deck developed by Neil and Bradley. They have a Twitch channel, father and son duo. This deck is really interesting. Kind of has an aggressive line where you can start off with Daisy into Anna into something like Moana or Alice, and you could quest for 2 with all those characters. You even got some burst lore with Hans over here, which will give you 1 lore on play if you have a queen or a princess character. Queen Sensor Core is like a location almost, or a spell book for any old school players. You're able to generate 1 lore every turn if you have a queen or a princess on board. And we play a lot of queens and princesses, including the queen. We have 3 different copies of the queen right here. We have 2 Sapphire, 1 Amber Queen over here. They all do different things. The 4-cost uninkable Crown of the Council, 3 strength, 2 willpower with ward, says when you play this character, look at the top 3 cards of your deck, reveal any number of them named the queen, and put them into your hand. You put the rest at the bottom of your deck. So that's an easy way to generate some value. You don't have any draw power outside of Rapunzel in this deck, but hey, this kind of counts. Then we have the Queen, Fairest of All. She's another shift character that has ward. She's a 2/6, so that's a pretty hefty body. For each other character named the Queen you have in play, this character gains +1 lore. So you have some real heavy questers here. That in combination with Cinderella, the right one, when you play this character, you may put an item named Glass Slipper in your discard to the bottom of your deck to gain 3 lore. Then we have Glass Slipper here, which will let you banish this item, exert a prince character, and you search your deck for any princess character, which is really interesting because not many cards in Lorcana will let you just search your entire deck for a specific character. And of course, we have Popsicle in this deck because it's Popsicle. There's some neat combos you can pull off in this deck alongside Restoring the Heart. If you have Aurora Waking Beauty, anytime you heal with your characters, you can re-ready her, which will stop your opponent from challenging her immediately. I'm yet to try this deck out myself personally, but this looks like a very strong strategy. I think this is the direction that Yellow-Blue is headed, and I'm going to put it in tier 2 for that reason. Not tier 1 because I don't think you'll see it very often in the meta, but according to Neil and Bradley, they've been doing pretty good on ladder. I think they have like 10 wins and 4 losses with this deck from what I seen last time. So I think it's a real deck that you should consider if you want to play something a little bit more off meta. Next up, we have Yellow-Green Discard. This is a deck by Royce Townsend that I found on Dreamborn. Really interesting. It's a discard dog playing 4 copies of Champ and Chernobog. Really what you're trying to do with this deck is take control of the board and the hand. So you're able to discard your opponent's hand with cards like Sudden Chill, Bare Necessities. You have Forgotten Me. I've been talking about how Diablo and Prince John are extremely powerful in this deck, but combine that with your 5-cost characters that you can play to sing We Don't Talk About Bruno or even Under the Sea. That's really powerful. One of the best plays you can do is use Ariel plus any other 3-cost or higher character to sing Under the Sea, because Ariel is a singer 5. And if you play Kita, Protector of Atlantis, you're pretty much putting most characters on the board in range for this Under the Sea to be a target for. They even got 4 copies of Sirhis, so you can deal with opposing Diablos. Green, yellow discard, definitely putting it in the tier 1 section. This deck is very powerful. Kind of hard to use, kind of niche. You know, I don't think many people will play it because it's a little bit more of a higher skill ceiling in my opinion. But when I have seen players use it, it just seems like it's one of the best decks. But that's not the only way you can play Amber Emerald. As you guys know, there is a Chernadog deck that's very popular that has been finding success in a lot of tournaments recently. This looks very similar to Ghosty's list. I personally like playing the Clarabelle, a shift line in this deck. Some people don't, understandable though. But overall, it's a more aggressive deck. You want to take advantage of the amount of 1-cost characters you play in this deck, because being able to play the 1-cost on turn 1 like Daisy, and then 2 ladies or 2 merfolks on turn 2 is really powerful when you can follow up with a 7-cost Tramp, because Tramp will cost way less for every card you have on board. So by turn 4, you're going to be able to play this Tramp for around 2 to 3 ink, which is really good. That'll let you draw into about 5 cards, discard 5 cards, hopefully discarding something like Lilo the Escape Artist, or filling up your discard pile for one of your 3 copies of Chernabog in here. It's an aggro style deck that has a kind of an issue dealing with some of the purple cards like Fox and Crab, and you know, it can be a little bit hard to get around some of the steel songs that we've been seeing, but Ursula helps you a lot with that in that scenario. And most of your 1-cost characters like Nala and Little John are going to have 4 willpower, so that's going to be very good for your Rapunzel targets. I may be a little biased, so that's why I want to put Chernadog up here in the Goose section, but I know it's not that good anymore, mainly because there's less people playing Sapphire. When Sapphire was the dominating color, this deck was a lot better, just because you can kind of rely on the ability to outrace them, outpace them. You're a lot faster than most Sapphire decks, but people are switching up their strategies. There's a lot of purple in the meta now, a lot of green mirror matches as well, so that does make it a little bit harder to use. So I kind of want to put it in the tier 1 to tier 2 section. I'll leave it in tier 1 though, because I think the ability to combine Daisy Duck with your other 2 lore questers like Merfolk and Lady means that you can, it's one of the best aggro decks, if not the best aggro deck. And speaking of aggro, we have a top 8 deck list by Zachary Powers from Double Look Games over here, making it in top 8 with his hyper aggro yellow purple deck. So if you want to play aggro but you don't want to play something like Rapunzel or like Lady in the Tramp style, maybe consider playing this version. It's a pretty budget style deck. I don't think there's a single legendary in this deck list actually. But hyper aggro got some new tools this format, like Honey Marin, which is another card that lets you gain 1 lore if your opponent has an exerted character. And other than that, we're pretty much using cards like the bosses on a roll, gathering knowledge and wisdom, goats, white roses, even Balloos to gain us more lore every turn without actually having to quest with a character, which is really good. I really like adding 3 copies of Show Me More in this deck. It's a 2-cost uninkable that just says both players draw 3 cards. Before, people used to play Amethyst Chromicon in this deck, and I think that was pretty good, but you were only drawing 1 card a turn. Show Me More lets you draw 3 cards for the same price. This deck also plays a lot of 2 lore questers, 4 Maleficent, 4 Lilo, 4 Daisy, and then you even have Piglet as a follow-up that can quest for 3, which is pretty nuts. But where does hyper aggro yellow purple land in this deck list? I do think this is going to be in the tier 2 section. It's a very good deck, a very strong deck, but it struggles a lot with the opposing big Sisus, Brawls, Sisu Daring Visitor. Like I've been saying, Fox and Crab are just very important right now in the meta because those are easy outs to Daisy. If any deck is playing Fire the Cannons or Storm Rage on and they can sing it really early, your Lilos and Maleficents are not going to get much value. So sometimes going second with this deck feels really hard to win. So because of that, I got to put it in the tier 2 section. Not buns, not buns. But there is another way to play the combination of yellow-purple. If you guys don't want to play a hyper-aggro deck, consider playing this Purpunzel deck list that Tran has been promoting on Twitter and Dreamborn. Also, shout out Lucas Serrano for getting top 8 at a case tournament with this deck. I do believe that he put in 1 more Skater Mim and -1 Lilo or something like that. But yellow-purple Rapunzel mid-range is a very powerful deck. I really like that this deck exists right now because it kind of does feel like you're playing a purple steel or like an emerald amethyst style deck. deck, but instead you have the ability of these amber characters that have 4 willpower and the ability to quest 2. Also 2 copies of World's Greatest Criminal Mind, which is a clean out to opposing Maui Sharks. So if you're having trouble dealing with Maui Sharks, the Criminal Mind just gets rid of them immediately, which is really good. And also shout out Speci. I know he was playing this deck or similar version of this deck at the LCC, which is really fun. But yeah, it's looking like a pretty strong evasive meta with all these evasive characters that we've been seeing. This deck can also play Bell Accomplished Mystic, which is another form of removal. Overall, a pretty good deck that's gonna go, you guessed it, in the buns section. Just kidding, guys. It's gonna go in the tier 1 section. I think it's that good. Like, I really do think this deck is that good. You just have to kind of know what you're doing with the strategy. But overall, I think the Amethyst engine is so strong right now that you can pretty much combine it with most color combinations and see a lot of great results, especially using the ability of the evasive characters with Peter Pan Shadow. We've been seeing a lot of Peter Pan Shadow Finder in this tier video, and I think that card is slowly taking over the meta, making this more of an evasive kind of meta. And yeah, as you can see, we don't have a single color combination in the buns section, and that's because I think most color combinations are playable this format, but just for the sake of the argument, I think it's going to have to be green-red. Green-red is the only buns deck, so we're going to move green-red from tier 3 to the buns section. Sorry, B. DeCandio. Sorry, fellow Christmas deck enjoyers. I do think this deck is not quite there yet, at least not this build. So if you guys have a spicy Emerald or Ruby deck list you guys want to drop below, make sure you drop that in our Discord as well. What the heck? You know what? That red-yellow that red-yellow song deck was definitely cope. I don't think it's that good, so don't even try and put it. I'm not even going to try and put it in the tier 3 section next to the blue-green cow deck. I think the blue-green cow deck is a lot more playable, or just like the combination of Emerald Sapphire. So we have 2 decks that are buns. It's going to be the red-yellow songs, like non-Mufasa red-yellow decks, and a Ruby Emerald style deck, which just doesn't have a place in the meta currently. But hey, I could be wrong. I need you guys to prove me wrong. I would love for you guys to prove me wrong. But until then, my Lorcana Goons, thank you so much for watching. Remember to stay tuned to Lorcana Goons. I appreciate you for sticking around. If you're still here, like, comment, and subscribe because it does support the channel. And that's going to be all for our meta tier list video. I'm going to actually save this and maybe put a link down so you guys can make your own tier list, but you're going to be able to find every deck list we covered in the description down below. So if you guys want to use those at your local tournaments, there you go. But let me know how you guys are feeling post Flaversham Fortisphere ban list. I want to hear your thoughts below on the meta. Do you agree? Do you disagree with this tier list? But until then, remember to stay tuned to Lorcana Goons, and we'll see you goons next time.